Big Tin Can is the world's leading sales learning and enablement platform that delivers the onboarding and training, preparation, coaching, customer engagement, and follow-up and insights that modern businesses need to win.
Welcome to the Sales Influence Podcast, where we talk about finding the why in how people buy. I'm your host, Victor Antonio. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for lending me those ears. And if you're watching this on YouTube or any other media, I appreciate your eyeballs. Today, I have a gentleman by the name of Rob Ashton. Now, this gentleman came across my virtual desk, and his topic, as it relates to sales, might be interesting. So I said, let's have him on the podcast. Let's see where this goes, because I think this is going to be a very interesting one. Rob, welcome to the Sales Influence Podcast.
Hey, Victor. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. Rob, why don't you give them your 1-minute commercial of who you are? Don't be bashful. Don't be shy. I know you're from the other side of the pond. You tend to be a little more reserved, but let it go a little bit.
Yeah, you picked up on that, did you? So I've been involved in the field of optimizing written communication for probably longer than I care to admit, but I set up a company called Emphasis in 1998, which went on to become one of the biggest, if not the biggest, written communications consultancies, training consultancies in the world. And since then has trained over 80,000 people from companies, tech giants of Silicon Valley right through to even the royal household at Buckingham Palace. And that company is still very much alive and kicking and doing great work. But I stepped down recently as CEO from that company to focus full time on writing, and I write about writing. So 6 years ago, I started researching the science behind what makes words work, what makes written words work, and that's just taken over my life. So now I spend all my time researching that, writing about it, and really just trying to spread the word so that people become more aware of the hidden impact of the words we read on what we think and what we do, and of course on what decisions we make, which makes it particularly relevant to sales success.
It's almost like we take, when I was reading your bio and I reviewed your website, I realized I'd taken a lot for granted already in terms of writing. But before we go into detail, talk to me a little bit about the company Emphasis and what was like the why for founding the company. What was the big need in the market that you saw?
I'll be honest, I went about it all the wrong way. So I should not have started Emphasis. It might seem like a startling admission, but I was working as an editor and had done that for many years. I'd certainly got my 10,000 hours. I was working initially on technical journals and then in consumer magazines. And I found I was doing the same thing over and over again. So I was applying techniques that any good copy editor should know. Not all of them do, but they were not revolutionary. And I was taking what people had written and making it much clearer, but much more impactful. And I found that it was almost like a reflex. I didn't need to think about it. And I thought, well, I always had an entrepreneurial bent. I think, one of the publishers I worked for was formed by a couple of entrepreneurs. And I think that just gave me the bug. And those two things came together. I thought, well, I'm going to get out there. I'm going to share these trade secrets with the world beyond publishing and enable people to write more effectively and to connect with the people they're trying to reach. The reason I say it was a mistake is because most people didn't know they needed help with that. So I was a solution in search of a problem back then. And in fact, even back then, people were even talking about people not writing anymore, and that this was going to be dying out, and we would just all be speaking to each other. It seems laughable now when you think how reliant we've become on it. So it took off slowly to begin with. It was a slow start, and then we got a big government contract, and the rest, as they say, is history. And now it's still. I'm so proud of that organization. It's working around the globe, and it even did pretty well in 2020 after the initial shock of the pandemic, and people realized that actually we could still talk to each other without being in the room together. So after the first month or so, it really started to pick up again, and it's doing extremely well. But the range of organisations that Emphasis works with is enormous. You know, I've mentioned a couple in the intro, but I mean, you know, a huge number of the world's largest law firms, for example, all of the big four consulting firms. I mean, you name it. Emphasis does it.
If I may ask, give me an example so I can wrap my brain around what is it that Emphasis does. Like, give me like a mini case study of like, look, Victor, here's the before, here's the after they've been emphasized.
Well, let's take a sales example, okay, which is really an end-to-end example, because if you think about it, you might get your sales lead come in, and you respond to it typically. It would probably come in as a written lead these days. So, you know, somebody might have filled in an inquiry form, and then you pick up the phone. But it's quite common now to respond in writing. So you'll send someone an email, and then you're trying to get somebody on the phone. You're trying to turn that into an appointment. So right there, straight away, you've got written communication. Let's say you then have a meeting with the prospect. And that's probably taken a bit of back and forth anyway. And they say, that's great, but I've got a decision chain here and I need to get a decision on this. Can you write me a proposal? So you then go away and you sweat over this document on which everything is going to hinge now, because you're not going to be able to speak to the decision makers, or rather you might have spoken to one decision maker, or it could just be an internal influencer. And so you need to turn that document into a silent sales professional, if you like. You know, you need to write something that's going to be doing your job for you, and you're not going to be there. So this person, they're either making, you know, they could be making a decision themselves, and we come back to that. But more likely they're going to be taking that to someone, and they're going to be saying, this company sounds great. You know, or they might not even do it. You know, they might not even be that complimentary. They might just say, I need a decision on this. And somehow you've got to take somebody through the sales thought and sales decision process purely with your words. Okay, so that happens, and then you then have to follow up. But I mean, the other scenario is you might actually be writing to the decision maker, and even in that case, it can go terribly wrong, because what people often do is they build a really good relationship in person or on the phone or in a Zoom or Teams call, and someone says, write me a proposal, and that might take it might be a few weeks before that lands. And what lands in the inbox or not usually on the desk of somebody now, but what they get, it often bears no relation to the style. Often bears no relation to that person that they've built a relationship with. Okay, people go into this kind of automaton robot mode. And you forget that you've actually got to warm the prospect up again, and you've got to take them through the process all over again. So it can fall foul then, and then you've got to close the deal. So you've got to chase it, and then you are using email, and then even beyond that, when the sale is made and you're trying to execute on it. You might, depending on if you're in a small company, you might be responsible for customer care then, or you might have a customer care team, and you're communicating with them internally, maybe on Slack or Teams messaging or whatever. And then that customer care team are probably going to be communicating with the customer, again, with the written word. It's very rare these days that we actually get to speak to people, from waking up in the morning and checking your email through to switching your phone off at night is pretty much written communication all the way. And so what Emphasis does is optimize all of that with all of those different types of professional and in all of those different situations, as well as things like handling complaints. I mentioned law firms. There you have internal knowledge management. That happens with the big consulting firms as well. And we think about engineering companies. Engineers typically don't go into into that profession because they love to write, and yet they have to communicate their knowledge. They have to capture their knowledge, and then even, it could be something as as running an entire oil refinery. You've got standard operating procedures. Again, it's all the written word, and it's usually the weakest link. So we're the company, or Emphasis is the company that strengthens that link.
There seems to be, just in listening to you, there seems to be no endless. It's just endless, right? In terms of where you can apply, the writing skills. I think it's really interesting. I mean, there's so many things. I wrote down a bunch of notes as you were talking, because you were saying so many good things. Let me see. Where do I begin? Because I love the fact that you gave a sales example. I appreciate that for this podcast. So thank you very much. I want to start out with this question to you, because you kind of mentioned it already. Is when we talk about language and how we speak, in sales, we always talk about your language dictates who you have access to or who you're relegated to. Speak to me a little bit about that, how your language, if you want to talk to, if you're, let's say, an average salesperson, but you want to get a meeting with a director, a president, or a CXO, what have you seen in language that would help me more likely get that meeting if I can just adjust my language?
There is, if I said there was a silver bullet, I'd be lying, because it's all nuance. This is not something where you can say, use these words and you'll get the meeting. There are examples where people have tried to do that, but the novelty of those wears off pretty quickly once people start using them. So what you need to remember, the best thing, the advice with the longest shelf life really is to say, look, remember the principles that underlie that effective written communication. Okay, so this is what you need to remember. You need to remember that person you are communicating with, now this sounds obvious, is not you. Now, when I say they're not you, I mean they don't have the voice in their head that you have in your head. Instead, they have their own voice. So it's almost like they are listening to their own personal playlist or backing track on their iPhone or iPod, and that will be influencing how they read your message. Now, your playlist will be influencing how you write your message, and that's where it all goes wrong. That the mismatch of those two things. You need to find a way to try to tune in to what that other person is listening to. So it's very easy, for instance, just to launch into your pitch, and usually that doesn't work. I would focus first of all on trying to build a relationship, or just try, use, if it's a large organization, kind of triangulating your way up to a decision maker rather than, that CEO. It's, there are lots of ways of doing it, but it's a subtle process. What you also need to
I was going to ask you if I may, because I really want to just get to something. Because you're saying something very important. I love the fact that you're talking about the different playlists we both have in our heads, and we have to listen or synchronize, or I guess get in sync with the other person. Like, what are some of the common mistakes? Not looking for silver bullets, but some of the common mistakes that people make that you go, don't do that. You shouldn't do that. That's not going to help.
Well, we all know that desperation kills a deal, right?
Right.
And if you are facing the end, if you're looking at your target, and you're getting to the end of your sales period, it's a really common one is to let that influence your communication. So that is when your playlist is, you're turning up the volume dial on that then, where in that situation, and that then will come out in your writing, and it will damp down how in tune you are with the other person's needs. So, in that situation, what I would do is I would switch off my phone, or shut down my laptop and go old school, get a piece of paper and a pen or pencil, and write down the name of this person, what they need, but crucially what they want and what they're interested in. This is sales 101, and yet it goes out of the window when we are writing to people. So you forget that, you start focusing on your needs. So you think, but what do they want? Not what do they need? Because we know that people buy what they want, not what they need. Right. And you need to make them want what they need. So you think, okay,
why do you think we forget, Rob? Why do you think we forget that it's that simple?
Do you know, it's a great question. Why do we take those basic, those core sales skills and forget them when we're writing? That's a critical question to answer, because it's a lot of this stuff. You could make things a lot better if you just remember those things. It's because writing is hard and reading is hard, much harder than we realize. We didn't evolve to read and write. We evolved to speak and listen. Now there are even neuroscientists who don't realize the significance of that. The human race has been writing for no longer than, as far as we know, as far as we have evidence, no longer than 5,000 years. Okay, the earliest writing was in modern, what is now modern day Iraq, but it's incidentally, it was commercial writing. It was business writing even back then. It was about a sales transaction. Okay, but most people have only been writing. Writing only became widespread in the last 100, 200 years, and that may sound like a long time, but it's not even a heartbeat in evolutionary terms. It's not long enough to evolve specific apparatus to process reading and to process writing. And in fact, when you're writing, you are wiring together. You are drawing on a network that joins up the eyes, the vocal areas of the brain, but also even the auditory, the hearing parts of the brain, and that network we create. That's what happens when we're learning to read. When we're learning to read, we create that network, and that's why it takes so long. You will learn to speak a language passively. As long as people are around you speaking that language, you'll pick it up as a child, and you'll even pick up the fundamentals of grammar. You'll know how to form the past tense or whatever. You just will. But that won't happen with writing. You could stare at an alphabet you're not familiar with. So maybe you don't read Hebrew or Arabic. You could stare at that for 10 years and you would be none the wiser, because it has to be an active process. And the reason that matters is because writing is way more complex and reading is way more complex than we think. So that's number one. Number two is that when we're reading, we're using a lot of energy. And when we're writing, we're using a lot of energy. And we're often really on the limits. If it's something quite complex, we're often on the limits of what our brains can cope with. It's a bit like, there are other examples of this. So, we other things we do. Say you're listening to the audio system in your car and you're pulling out at a busy junction, and you instinctively, it's just been playing in the background for the whole time, and you've just been enjoying it. But now it becomes an irritation because you need more brain power, and so you find yourself instinctively reaching for the dial and turning it down. Well, that's the same with writing. As soon as you come across anything that's quite complex, well, we'll come on to emotions in a second, but if it's something quite complex, then it's starting to draw on your cognitive resources. But it also that can leave us to rely more on the kind of rules of thumb, what people call heuristics, and so can make us make decisions based on biases, based on if something is hard to read, for instance, then we will, or if something is easy to read, we tend to believe it. If something is hard to read, then less so, and we fall back on those. But to answer your question, the reason we fall into the trap is because writing is hard, but also because when we are writing, we're in a solitary situation, but we are creating a social transaction. We're creating a transaction between two people, and yet we are on our laptop. It's just us, and our laptop is in front of us. It's connected by our fingertip, by our hands and our fingers. And when we use tools like that, we grow networks in the brain that, they become extensions of our brain, and we behave as if we are solitary, as if we're on our own. We are thinking about our needs, and not those of the other person. So it's a contradiction. You're on your own. You are doing something, as far as your brain is concerned, for you. You are thinking. We think on screen, don't we? We're typing away. We think, and you would never. There's no filter often. You're thinking, I've got to get this deal. I've got to make my numbers this month. But if you were speaking to that person, there would be a whole different layer. It'd be a completely different situation, because you'd be much more attuned to their needs, and there would be a filter. You would stop, and you'd think before you said things, rather than just we just write things and send them. And there's even evidence that you've probably heard of the neuropeptide oxytocin, which is central to forming relationships. It regulates adrenaline. It regulates all sorts of processes but it's central to building a relationship. It's kind of like a social lubricant. And there's evidence that is released, even in a phone call. If you're speaking to somebody, you release oxytocin, but it isn't with reading and writing. So you could be, if you're in a written transaction, you're not getting the benefit of that hormone that's going to be regulating how you are reacting, and enabling you to pick up on the cues. And of course, the cues themselves are going to be either far more subtle and not even there, because it's writing, and we're dealing with much less information. So it's complex. Clearly, it's lots of reasons.
I love your explanation. I mean, you made me think at a different level, but you're right. There is no feedback loop, right? Like when you're talking to somebody, you see the full body language, maybe tone, vocalization. So there is some feedback that would probably, as you say, regulate how you would communicate. But when you're talking to a computer, it's almost like, it's an inanimate object. There's no feedback. And so maybe that kicks you into automatic mode. But you're fighting an uphill battle, Rob, I think, because, in what you do, because as we know, I'll state the obvious, attention spans are getting shorter. People's ability to write seem to be getting weaker. And then you're telling them at the same time, no, writing is important. And it's, how do you, what do you see? I see a deteriorating quality of writing is what I typically see, especially because of social media, the short bursts, emojis, and all that stuff. But yet we also know that the written language is important in terms of communicating when you're not there. And so how are you fighting against that? What do you see on the battlefield?
Well, it can be something that only a few people get, so you can work with huge organizations and then find that it's a subset of that organization. It's a small population that works on it. But more often, you'll find that it's not every organization that does it. So if you take a particular sector, you'll find that maybe one or two players within that sector will focus on this, and the others won't. But if you are, if your sales antennae are well tuned, you'll spot an opportunity there, which is that if most people aren't doing it, then there's a potential advantage to doing it. And we all know that to win in sales, you don't need to win by think of horse racing. You don't need to win by 10 lengths, do you? You just need to win by a nose. You still win, and it's the same with focusing on written communication. If you can just do it 10% better than everybody else, then you are giving yourself an advantage. So it's not that you need to become this gifted writer. It's not that you need to transform, dedicate your entire life to improving your written communication. You don't need to do that. You just need, even becoming aware of it Even if you do nothing else, even if you just become aware that what you're writing will have an impact, and crucially, that writing is not speaking, then that will give you a scare quotes unfair advantage. That will give you the edge, and you will find that naturally you will start to pay more attention to the other person's wants, and to become more mindful of what you're doing and the impact it has. And I would say, if you do nothing else, if you're dealing with something that's complex, if you're dealing with something that's emotive, then request a call, request a meeting. Don't try to handle something that's, don't. If you find yourself trying to write an email, and you think, well, I need to say this and this, and but I need to get that caveat in, and I need to mention that, but what if they think this, so I should add that bit in. Alarm bells should be ringing, as soon as that process starts. As soon as just get out of there. Just think.
That is such a great point.
What am I doing? Why am I doing this?
By the way, pull the ripcord, right, Rob? Just pull the ripcord.
Yeah, exactly, and just delete the whole lot and say, hey, it'd be great. I think we probably need to have a chat about this. Let's sort it out, and send that email.
Yeah.
Use the email to request a call, and then goodness me, you will give most people don't do that, and you will straight away give yourself an advantage. But you'll advance the process as well. As soon as you start talking, your shoulders drop, and you kind of go, oh yeah, I see what you mean. And it's as you say, it's there is a feedback loop. You're communicating in real time. You can course correct as you're doing that, and you will find that an email that exchange that might have taken several days as you go back and forth, and still might get you nowhere or make things much worse, can be replaced by it might only be a 5-minute phone call. It just still astonishes me that people don't do that.
It's God. People who are going to listen to this segment are going to just nod their head, going, "Yep, that's me." I spent all this time writing, deleting, couldn't get it right. Well, I should have just pulled the ripcord and made the call, or to get on a Zoom call. And so I think, you're highlighting several fascinating things. Earlier you mentioned that there's a difference between reading and writing versus talking and listening. And until you said that, I'd never really, separated the two and realized that there's a different demand load, a demand cognitive load on each one, right? In other words, talking and listening is probably easier, as you say, reading and writing. And I think that's big. And when you're telling people to look, just write it the way you would say it, I see a lot of people trying to sound very fancy. You know what I mean? Trying to sound like they're 2 levels up. And I think that stops a lot of people from writing. And so, as the market right now moves towards more a text-driven, relationships with people, give me your take on that. And, how could we be better at that? You've already mentioned several things, like, first of all is the awareness piece, right? Second, probably speaking in such a way that it would resonate with the other person. Anything else you want to add to that?
Well, when you say people try and take it up a couple of levels and to sound fancy, the good news is that you need to do the opposite. So where you've got, when people do that, they're doing it from a position of low confidence normally. They think they have to put on airs and graces. They think they have to make their, use flowery language. And back when I used to run training courses myself, that was a common objective that people would state. There was often one person in the room who, when I'd said, what do you want to get out of today's course? And they'd say, I want to learn how to use longer words and to make my writing sound more impressive. What you should be doing is the opposite. So you should be trying to impress with your knowledge and with the help that you give the client, the steer, how you steer them, how you advise them, how you position yourself as an expert by giving them help, by sharing your knowledge, and the fancy words, the flowery words, they get in the way. When I say improve readability to people, it's not about stripping out the jargon. as long as it's the customer's jargon and not yours. Okay, so you need to think, okay, so the long words I'm using, the technical words I'm using, are those the words the customer uses? So pick up on the words they use when they're speaking to you. Make a note of the technical terms and write in their, take it to them, write in their world. But the words in between the jargon. So you don't use your jargon, because that will, if they don't understand it. If they do, that's fine. You can kind of create a feeling of being what's called in-group bias. You're all in this together. But strip out the words in between the jargon. Reduce those right down. So instead of saying "in spite of the fact that," you could say "despite." Instead of saying "commence," you can say "start." Instead of saying initiate, you can say start.
You're making me laugh because I hear people just use all these big words. You're like, why? Yeah. Why can't you? By the way, I want to pause right here because I want to compliment you. By the way, and so as I was doing my research on you, so you're the guy who looks at neuroscience and writing and tries to kind of understand what's going on, right? And then I read your blogs. I tried to go through a lot of your blog posts. And they were so well written. So if you're listening to this again or watching this, go to robashton.com. Just read a few of his articles. And what impressed me was that, you're that person that says, hey, I'm going to help you with writing. And then I actually go and read some of your blogs, and you did not disappoint, is what I want to say. You did not disappoint. So I want to highlight robashton.com. Check out the blogs. Great insight. And by the way, you even annotate all these studies, and all the data that you actually present in there. And I was like, wow, this is really impressive. So I just wanted to compliment you on that before I forgot.
Thank you. That's very kind. I mean, the studies are important because there's an awful lot of pseudoscience on the web, particularly when it comes to communication. There's a lot of hearsay and wishful thinking. So I just, when I write those pieces, I like to emphasize that, I reference the science. They're not. It's not science writing, but it's they are backed up by science. So it's advice backed up by science. But those pieces take a very long time to write, and in fact, for me, it's if I'm going to call myself, well, I'm not a writing expert, but if I am, because of what I do, it obviously shines a spotlight on my writing, and so I have to put even more effort into it. But for everybody, it really is a case of hard write, easy read. It's even people who are you read their stuff and you think, wow, they're amazing writers. They've put a lot of effort into that. It takes effort to write well, and that's always the case, unfortunately, because it's an entirely unnatural thing to be doing, so it's always going to be like that. But the some of the examples of these words that get in the way, I mentioned commence and start, and if you have words that end in shun, so tion or sion, that's normally a sign that you can tighten up that phrase or that sentence. So if you were saying, I appreciate your feedback, we're going to launch an investigation into that. Now you could then say, thank you for that feedback rather than I appreciate. It doesn't really matter so much. But when you've got launch an investigation, you could say we're going to investigate. So, it's maybe not the best example because launch an investigation sounds like much more active. But if you find, things like, make a connection, I want to make a connection. I want to connect. To use the word connection, you've got to say, make a, you've got to add make a. Otherwise, you can't say I connection, or I want connection. You got, so you say I want to connect is you can just strip out words. So anything that ends in a shun, you can normally, I call those just magnets for flowery language. As soon as you've got words like that in there, And decision's a good one, actually. You could say, can I give you some assistance to make a decision? Or you could say, can I help you decide? And it's straight there. It's something happening, and it's much shorter, leads far fewer words, much less processing power. And what you're trying to do there is to free up the buyer's brain so that they can decide, so that they can go with you, so they can take in the advice you're giving and think, that they really know what they're talking about. That's and you, the one other thing I would say is storytelling. We are storytelling animals, and that's something I use a lot in the blog you mentioned. But we can use that even in our writing. So we could say, for instance, here are the figures, or here is the proposal, or here is a plan. Or you could say, I've been thinking about our conversation, and something struck me about what you really should be doing. And I'm thinking that's off the top of my head, and it's that you could tighten that up. But it's you start to tell a story. And you've got a human being in that story, and you've got a human being connecting to the prospect, and so that will start to engage them in a way that just giving them the facts won't, or it has a much higher chance of engaging them, because we're storytelling animals. We communicate in story all the time, and we have an inner story. We have an inner monologue, when we're walking around, when we're going about our daily lives. We are looking at what's around us, and we are telling ourselves a story about it. And so if you tell the prospect a story, then you're kind of like pressing pause on that particular playlist, and you're saying, hey, listen to this one, and then they'll be engaged. And there's even brain scanning evidence that shows that when people listen to stories, the areas of their brain that light up are the same areas as are lighting up in the storyteller. So storytelling literally synchronizes brains. And I think it's important to clarify, what we mean by that. As I said, you're just saying, I call them micro stories. I've been looking at this, I've been thinking, or I had an idea over the weekend, or whatever. It's not once upon a time. You're just.
I like micro stories. I want to kind of like, there's a lot of subtleties of what you're saying. I think I can tease out a few, but I want to make sure people get this. Is that one of the big things you've highlighted so far is that we want to reduce the brain's consumption of energy or cognitive load, right? How much we make the brain think in order to make the information more, I guess, have a higher receptivity. For example, simple language you've talked about already. You've mentioned using visuals, I'll say, because that reduces the amount of energy I need to comprehend. Then you also talked about storytelling, which is another form of saying, if I tell you a story, then, again, the cognitive weight I'm putting on your brain is not that heavy. I wanted you to kind of stick a little bit with the micro storytelling, because I really like this, because I want to tie that with your tightening of the language. When somebody's trying to tell a story, whether I'm trying to sell a product, sell an idea, sell a vision, what are some things that we could do better? We got to tighten up the language a little bit, but what are some of the things we can do within that storytelling that say, this will really make it pop? If you had to write it out, oh, by the way, I should ask you that first, Rob. Should you write it out first and then speak it, or should you really learn to tell the story and then try to write it and maybe have this virtuous cycle of trying to get better at telling stories? So 2 questions. First, what can I do to tell a better story? And would it help me to write it out first?
So I mean, we're talking about a written story here. But doing the opposite, reading out loud what you've written, can help, and I'll tell you why in a second. But I think that what you've got to do with that story and with that structure is you've got to orientate the prospect. You've got to take them from where they were before and get them in the right headspace. Now, the big department stores used to have this thing. I don't know if they still do it. It's been a long time since I've been to one, but where they would have a hot air blower as you walk in through the door. If you walk off a cold street, and there'll be this, you get this whoosh of hot air, and then probably you'd smell perfume. They have the perfume counter. What they're trying to do there is they're trying to, I think they call it decompress. They're trying to decompress the customer. So they're trying to get them out of the headspace that they were in when they were out on the street and into shopping mode, and kind of, trying to get them to exhale. And when you are trying to communicate with a client or a prospective customer, you need to do the same thing. And the mistake that people make a lot is they hit them with a problem. And they go straight in with, here's the problem, here's what I'm going to do about it. And even though it might be true, if they say, I've even had that now, people send me cold emails and say, I've looked on your website and there is a problem with it, and it's like.
By the way, does that drive you nuts, Rob, when you're getting all these spam emails?
Yes. Well, I've got a great way of dealing with them now, but yeah, it's like, who are you? So hopefully this person knows you. This is why triangulating and building your presence is important. But you need to get them to decompress and to stop thinking about what they were thinking about before, and get them thinking about this. So I always start. I say start with the position. Start with where they are now. Okay. So if you're thinking about a proposal, and this applies to a formal document as much as it applies. Actually, you can apply it just to one email. Okay. And I think of the 4 P's, which is position, problem, possibilities, proposal. And the position is where they are now. So, so you could say, and you can weave story into this. You can say, I've been looking at your success and I read that piece in the Wall Street Journal that says, you're needing to focus on this now. And that's great. Okay. And they're going to be nodding. You want to get them nodding first. Okay. And then, so that's position. That's where they are now. And then there's the problem. The problem is why they can't stay there. Okay, so you then say, but I noticed that, and then, and you introduce a threat. Excuse me, you introduce a threat. And that's then starting to make them think, oh, hang on. So if you think about it, they've opened the file in their brain. You get them to open the file about this thing they're trying to achieve. And then you introduce a threat, which is actually why they might not be able to achieve it. And then you build on that. So when you've got the problem, it's okay. So, give them some facts and figures and, kind of start to lay it on, and it's kind of, oh, actually, yeah, I see what they mean. And by the end of that section, which could just be a couple of sentences in an email, or it could be a couple of pages in a proposal, they should be saying, we've got to do something about this. And then, of course, that's perfect. If you're selling, that's where you want someone. Because then they are perfectly primed to receive your suggested solution. Now, the possibilities in a proposal, there could be several of those, and you could kind of tick them off with kind of pros and cons of each. Or you could go straight into your suggestion, which is the proposal. That's the 4th P. And that's it. You're taking them through a process there, through actually not just a logical thought process, but an emotional one, because we make decisions with emotions and we justify them with logic. And it's no good coming up with an amazing business case if you're not engaging the emotions as well. So there's 4 P's of position, problem, possibilities, proposal.
Wait a minute, say that again. So it's position, problem,
possibilities, proposal.
Possibility.
Yeah.
I would like to add one more P to that. I think it's missing a P. I'm gonna throw it out there, okay? I'll throw it out there because by the way, I love your framework. So
go for it.
There's the positioning, which is basically here's where you're at, right? Then here's the problem that you're probably facing now or will be facing in the market, right? And then that's when you introduce the product, right? Here's the solution, right?
Yeah.
But I also think before you get to proposal, or maybe after proposal, but I think it's after product is there has to be some type of prediction. And I just want to throw that out there as an idea because I use it in my hero story. And the prediction is, here's what happens after you implement our product or solution. And maybe you combine those two together. But the prediction is, here's where you're going to be if you do these things. Here's the proposal. What do you think, Rob? Can we add that P in there?
Absolutely. And in fact, the predictive ending is something that I often recommend. If you are, because what you're doing is you're getting the reader to envision this new future, and not only that, it starts a process, or it continues the process. So it stops that kind of hard stop at the end. People say, well, call to action. Oh, buy it. That's not what you want something that's a little bit less obviously self-centered. But if you're saying, so when you do this, you should see this happening, and then, if you really want to amp it up, contrast it with the problem that you mentioned earlier in the document.
I like that approach better, actually. I think you're spot on. I love that because you're right, because the proposal has some type of take it or leave it, buy it, call to action, right? Where if you had the predictability piece at the end, what we really want you to do is land here, there's more of a caring aspect, it seems to me.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to, there's something called reactance in psychology, which is, if you tell someone to do something, then there's kind of initial kind of resistance to doing that just because you've told them. So people don't like to be told what to do.
That's exactly why I reacted. As soon as you said that, I go, he's right. Rob Ashton is right. I said, because the sales reactance will kick in. I'm not doing that.
Exactly.
You can't tell me what to do. Let me think about it.
Yeah, and then you kind of get that, well, this makes no sense. Why are you not doing this? And you think, why are my prospects not buying this? Why did they not go with this decision? It makes no sense. It's because you told them to do it. You've got to be more subtle than that, and you've got to it's so easy to kind of destroy any credibility you have and any trust. If you are focused entirely on that sales target, and you're trying again, you go back to desperation kills the sale. That can come out in your writing very, very easily. And we know trust is very fragile. I had an example of this actually, and it wasn't a writing example, but it was a marketing agency, and I was talking to them, and I mentioned my blog and signing up, and I said, "Oh, have you seen it? Have you seen I got this free course on there?" And they said, "No, but I will definitely check that out." Now that's what psychologists call a low warrant queue, and the reason the name doesn't matter so much, but it's a low value statement, okay? Because that's something that's saying you'll do something is very easy, okay? So if you say I put my customers first, then that's very easy to say. And so when people are listening to that, or when they read it, they will tend to kind of they'll take notice of it, but they won't place much weight on that. But what that guy then did was nothing apart from chase me to try and close the deal. Because I can see if he signed up for my course, and he didn't. Right. So he didn't do, and not only that, it wasn't going to cost him anything. And so it's like, okay, so I said sign up for this. It cost you nothing, and you didn't even do that. So buy, so that's a high warrant queue, and it's the same as saying I'll get you a proposal
by the way,
tomorrow.
I've never heard. I don't mean to interrupt, but I've never heard those phrases. So if I didn't hear it, most likely the folks listening or seeing haven't heard the phrase either. Low warrant queue. Like how do you spell warrant in this case? W-A-R-R-A-N-T?
As in a warrant for your arrest. W-A-R-R-A-N-T.
I've never heard this phrase. So can you define a phrase? Just define.
Yeah. So it's and this is. That's a good example of well-established psychology principles that don't find their way into the business world. And that's what I've been doing for the last 6 years. Is there's so much stuff out there where you read it, and it's often not in research papers. It's in undergraduate textbooks. It's something that people have, the psychologists will know about it, but most people don't. And in that particular case, it's is something called warranting theory, which is all about, how we build up trust, how we reduce uncertainty, actually, how we reduce uncertainty. And it's so relevant to sales. And
big time. Yes.
So it's like, how do you reduce uncertainty about a supplier? Or in your case, if you're writing, how do you reduce the decision maker's uncertainty? And there's this warranting theory says that we have this series of or this kind of that not all signals that we send are equal, not all signals of trust, or not all information that we're giving is equal. So the things that are easy to fake or easy to say, just easy to say, when we're listening to those things or when we're reading those, we kind of go, oh, okay, yeah, so they say they put the customer first. That's great. That's good. That will be a low warrant cue because it's easy to say and anybody could say it. When it comes to something that's a bit more difficult to do, then they tend, people place more, or we as human beings, we all do this. We place more we place more value on those things. So a good example would be saying to a prospect, I will shoot you an email by the end of the day, and then not doing it, sending it tomorrow instead. Because straight away you'll introduce a note of doubt, and that's a high warrant cue. That's something that, oh right, yeah, so they said they would do it, that's easy, but they haven't done it. So okay, so and even if the prospect is really understanding and thinks, oh, okay, well, we're all busy, the fact is you kind of broken a micro promise. You said you would do something and you haven't, and it starts to erode trust. Gotcha. And at what could be what usually is a very fragile part of the sales cycle. So yeah, the small things matter.
So it's a high warrant cue basically reduces certainty. Did I get that right?
A high warrant cue can increase certainty, as you can flip it on its head. You can say, high warrant. Just think of something. High warrant is something that's difficult to fake.
Right.
Low warrant is something that's easy to fake or easy to do.
Okay, I got it now. I got it now. Yeah, got you. Because the easy stuff everybody can commit to. So that was the low warrant cue when the guy said, I'll just sign up for your newsletter later. It's a low warrant cue. I got that.
And then he didn't do it. So that's the high warrant thing. It's, of course, one of the lessons from that is don't make promises that you're not absolutely certain you can't keep, even if they seem trivial. Because they will all add up and they will erode confidence.
Yeah, you reminded me when you said there's a lot of stuff like behavioral science, some of the stuff that people, the folks in neuroscience are finding that businesses don't, never makes it into the business sphere. Daniel Pink, who I'm sure you're familiar with, he has a saying. I can't remember how it goes, but it's something to the effect of what science knows and business does are two different things. In other words, there's a gap between what the science knows and what businesses are actually doing. I wanted to get back to this because I think, when folks listen or watch a podcast like this, it's always, there's a lot of nuggets, but sometimes it's hard to put into a framework to take away and actually execute on. But I think you gave something, and you gave me something. Hopefully the listeners and watchers something I think is really interesting. When you talked about your 4 Ps, maybe 5 now, that what I love about that your P system is that I look at, let's say, the positioning, and then I can work on when I by the way, I'm layering this in with your writing skills, right? Improving your writing skills, because maybe if I put these in 4 or 5 buckets, the 4 or the 5 Ps, then within those 4 or 5 Ps, I can really focus in on what my writing skill level should be. In other words, for example, if I'm positioning something, I should really focus on maybe writing to be able to position that product better. Can you speak to that? We can kind of close this, interview off with that. Like, how could I use that as like 4 or 5 buckets where I can improve my speaking or my writing on? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I guess you got 2 bits really. One is the structure and one is the content. Okay. So if you're thinking position, problem, possibilities, proposal, and then predict at the end, which I love. So that gives you your structure. That gives you that can be a nice framework for you as you're writing. And then you've got how you implement that, how you execute it, because just writing down those 4 Ps isn't going to cut it, is it? Obviously. So then you've got you use that framework by writing sentences that are active. You got someone doing something. But you keep it short and simple, so they're readable. You don't overload the reader's brain, and you make it very focused on that reader, on that decision maker. So you need both components. But it's, the good news is that it's not about flowery language. It's about using their language, which sends a signal. You're just trying to position yourself as an ally, not as somebody who is trying to sell them something. You're someone who, this is, if you're just trying to sell them something they don't need, then I don't want to talk to you. You are trying to help them. And if you're genuinely trying to help them, then your job is to remove the barrier to that. And the way to do that is to use the psychology by just, getting this message into their head, using that 4 Ps framework and readable language. Just briefly, I would say that something you have to remember is that reading and writing is not data transfer, and this is where we trip up. We think we're just trying to get data from one head to another. Reading is a miracle of adaptation. You're seeing dots and squiggles on a screen, and you're hearing a voice in your head. So you need to make sure that the voice they hear is the right voice. And the other thing is that when we read, because it's so complex, reading is 90% hallucination. Reading is mainly prediction, and then confirming or not whether what you thought was there is there or not. So when they're reading your thing, that time you think, I wrote it, why didn't they see it? It's there in black and white. It's because that's not how we read. We read and see, what we expect to see, and then maybe we correct it. And you asked me about reading out loud earlier on, and I would say that that's actually one good way to shortcut that is to read what you've written out loud, and that slows down your brain so that you actually see what's there and not what you expect to see.
Right. That's such an important point, by the way. I remember reading a study, Rob, maybe you've seen it, it was a tapping exercise where people would have to tap a tune, right? And the other person would have to predict whether the other person got the tune or not. Right. And I think their prediction was they should get like 50-50 will get it. And I think the actual prediction rate, accuracy rate rather, was like 3%. So what I heard in my head.
Yeah, you're almost right? Spot on there. Yeah, it's 2.5%. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. Okay. It was so this was Elizabeth Newton. It was back in the 90s.
I love talking to another nerd. I love talking.
I'm such a nerd on this. yeah, but it was the thing. Absolutely, it was. People thought, if I tap this tune out, and it could be something like "Happy Birthday," it's kind of, and you kind of think, surely they'll get that, surely they'll hear this, and to be clear, we're just kind of tapping out the rhythm, right?
Right.
And the actual number was 2.5%. What one of the things I thought was particularly interesting about that is there was a statistically significant difference between how good men were predicting would how many people would guess and how good women were. So women guessed
I didn't read that part of the study.
Yeah, women guessed it would be 45% would be able to get it, and men guessed 55%. But it's still a big error when it's actually only 2.5%. Yes, people can't hear the voice in your head, and they can't hear. They can't hear all the things that we layer on top of our writing. Yeah, it's a great study. Yeah. Glad you brought that up.
That's funny. You reminded me of it. Is that we'll really make this a wild ending here? Is that I was listening to the guy from Shark Tank, which is I think is Dragon's Den on your side of the pond, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Dragon's Den, right?
Yeah.
And so Kevin O'Leary was talking about how this ties back to women and men making predictions. And he said he liked working with women best because when he looked at predictive accuracy of how fast a business would grow, in other words, hit their numbers, women were much more conservative and therefore much more accurate. And this is just another example of, I guess, the male ego. Just saying, that's where it's going to be, out there somewhere. That's how right I'm going to be.
Yeah, I still, that example just still it's so powerful and so true. It's something, I challenge listeners to try it themselves, and say, hey, how about this? Can you guess what this tune is? And you'll think it's obvious, and it's so not. It's such it's so enlightening when you do that.
I use it a lot when I do sales training. I'm working with managers, and I talk about how they give people directions. And sometimes they're, as you earlier said about, you predict something while you're writing, you're predicting that they're going to get it. Same thing here. In many cases, managers kind of hear the tune in their head, but the employee is not hearing the same tune, which is why they're not on the same page. Any final thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. That colors everything. And emotions, the emotion they're experiencing will color everything. It's, if they are upset, then they won't be listening to you, or they won't be reading what you've written. This is why it's such bad advice to start with the bottom line. Usually, it kind of, there's some advice that went around the web a few years ago, and it was widely shared. And people, and this advice said, start with the bottom line, which is what the military generally do. If you say, look, there's going to be no annual pay rise this year, or leave is cancelled. That's the bottom line. You read that, that's like being punched in the face, and you will be in an emotive space, and you won't take in whatever is in front of you. But if we are upset about something, we look for clues in our environment that we're right to be upset. So if you've had an argument with your spouse, or if you're stuck in traffic, and let's say that in a misguided attempt to kind of ring the changes and get some relief from that, you check your email, and the first email you see will probably upset you. It could be quite neutral. It's because that's what we do. So in that conversation, that's often why it goes so wrong, is that people are in a different place, and that right. Their emotions they will layer their emotions over everything that they hear and read.
So how do you do that, Rob? How do you, we've all been in a situation where we want to write. So we're coming to you now for writing advice. So imagine there's Victor laying on the couch, and this is what Victor's asking you as you're giving him advice at a therapy session. I'm writing an email, right, in response to an incident, or something I want people to really understand, because apparently they're not getting it. How do you know when you're being too soft versus too terse? I know it's a tough question, but, what are some guidelines if I'm being not direct enough, or maybe being too direct?
Well, you can go back to your 4 Ps, or I'm going to give you another acronym, which is SCRAP, mm-hmm. which is a similar thing, which stands for situation, complication, resolution, action, and politeness. So the situation is, I've noticed this. The complication is, we shouldn't be doing X related to that. The resolution is, this is what we should do instead. So from now on, or from Monday, or whatever, that's your action. This is what we're going to be doing. And then the politeness is, thanks. Thanks for your help in making sure we all do that and keep ourselves safe, or whatever it is. So you're taking the heat out of it. If it's really emotive, then you need to be speaking to people, but often that's not practical when you've got a lot of people. But yeah, SCRAP. Yeah,
that is so good, Rob. Rob, that is good. That is good. Nobody's ever given me a framework for that. I live on frameworks, man. So that's works. A keeper.
It works. It really works, that one. Yeah.
I like the politeness piece at the end. I'm not crazy about the acronym SCRAP, because it's kind of
well, I say to people, you make sure you got the situation in there. Okay, if you're using SCRAP, right. Make sure you got the S, because otherwise it's not very good. Yeah. So it's it's a way of making sure you've got that one in there as well.
Rob, let these wonderful folks know where they can find out more information about you.
Well, if they, I mentioned briefly the free training course that I've created. I'm just trying to raise awareness of this stuff. So it's completely free. It's an email sequence, but it has audio built in, so you can listen to it like a podcast. And it's called Silent Influence, for reasons that should be obvious by now. So if people go to robashton.com/influence, they can sign up there. If they're interested and want to get some help from Emphasis, this company that I recently stepped down from, that's still alive and kicking, as I said, and doing great work. So if they go to writing-skills.com, then they can find out all about that there too.
When they go to robashton.com, talk to me a little bit about the course, Silent Influence. What's in there? What do I get out of it?
So it's what I'm doing there really is taking the research that I've been doing for the last 10 years, and I'm still doing, and breaking it down into a way. Well, what I'm trying to do is make it engaging and hopefully entertaining. So, I'm taking people through real world scenarios, telling stories, and weaving in the research and what people get wrong. So the kind of uncommon advice, the things people should know, that enable, especially when you're reading the things that drive decisions. So it starts off with just one email a day, just for 5 days, and then the secret is actually there are bonus emails. So as I do more research, I create another lesson and another audio, and I send that out. So once you're on the list, you'll be sure to keep up to speed with all the research I'm doing. But those only go out every few weeks. So it's and it's not a sales funnel. It's genuinely free.
No, I got you.
That's people think when we sign up, we're so used to this, aren't we? We sign up for something, we think we're gonna be sold, and there's nothing wrong with that. But in this particular case, I'm just trying to get people to take this seriously and to raise awareness. So that's
back to
what
reading and
that
writing.
is.
I love it. Anyway, visit robashton.com, but really check out his blog. I'm a super recommend the blogs, and when you see how well written they are and footnoted, I mean, I literally, Rob, I was impressed. So thank you very much for being on the Sales Influence podcast. And on that note, this is Victor Antonio, always reminding you that selling ain't hard when you know how to write and you know how to listen and you know how to talk and all those good things and you know how. Check out the Sales Velocity Academy, but make sure, go to robashton.com, check that out, read that, and as always, we'll see you next time.
Big Tin Can is the world's leading sales learning and enablement platform that delivers the onboarding and training, preparation, coaching, customer engagement, and follow-up and insights that modern businesses need to win.